And what I know is we need a single best chart right now. We might as well do Brazil. It's a confirmation of all that we've known. Thanks particularly to Katja Przikansky for her great coverage with Bloomberg News. The commodity boom over, up we go. Brazilian GDP, John Farrow, what a success through the 90s. It ended, then we came back in with a vengeance. Negative 4.5.
This is an example of a country that is everything China does not want to be. Chasing growth for growth's sake without reforms. I would strip the commodity story out and just look at the credit boom in Brazil over the last decade that would trace that GDP chart right there. When I go to my guest, Chris Watling, you look at that chart. Brazil, I think it's going to get worse before they get better, considering that you also have a economy and a fiscal policy that cannot run counter-cyclical to that downturn because there's pressure on the budget as well?
Yeah, I think you've got a lot of problems in Brazil and political problems as well as all of the above. So I think it's very challenging. And it really was. It's an economy that's never really reaped the gains properly of high commodity prices.
Is it discrete and contained, or does it have a contagion effect? I can't figure it out.
Well, it's a big economy. So, I mean, normally you'd say if an economy that size, what is it, fifth or sixth biggest in the world, had a crisis, that would have a contagion effect. That would be the normal expectation.
But there's a belief maybe that's not so, that it can be separate.
It may be, and there's always a belief before these events, that's right. Whether it's Brazil or one of the other emerging markets, it's hard to say, but there's a lot of debt in these places, though. That's
Peter Shafrick with us with RBC Capital Markets. Have you seen a good study on black markets? I mean, Brazil is one big black market of the rates that you study, almost like a two-tier system. They've got to normalize that at some point.
I mean, there's plenty of studies about this, but can I just throw one comment in?
Please.
I mean, you know, you just mentioned contagion. I think we have it already. I mean, you know, it's not necessarily directly from the trade links, but if you look at the way South America is going in general, none of these economies is really in great shape. You know, and it's not necessarily because Brazil is bad, but it's clearly an impact, and it's common causes that are impacting all of these economies.
And we had John Farrow. You did the internet stories out at Bloomberg.com and Business.com. Credit Suisse talking about an overpriced ruble, somewhat like an overpriced real in Brazil.
You just wonder how much worse it can get then. We talk about transmission mechanisms. We know what the transmission mechanism has been. The dominant one has been through the commodity market. The question I keep asking is, at what point do we see it through the credit market?
I'll answer your question in a second, but let me stress this point, because I think it's mightily important. And the stress that you're seeing through the commodity markets, not only on the usual suspects, Russia, Brazil, or, you know, China even. What you also see is, I mean, we've got the OPEC meeting on Friday. A lot of these guys who are sitting around the table, they're under an enormous amount of stress. And the reason is because the oil price is down, the revenues are down, and they have huge budgets to fund, and they can't. And I think that's a big problem for these guys.
I would add to that, it's not just those prices where there's contagion, it's also the global industrial cycle. A lot of global capex in the last decade has fed these commodity producers.
Will the markets move on December 16th? Obviously, that's a money question, but as you mentioned, Chris, one and done is your house view at Longview Economics. So everything's done. There's a press conference. We know she's going to make news within the press conference, but is it all priced in? I don't buy it for a minute.
Well, I think the one is pretty much priced in. There's a little bit more to do, but we're pricing in quite a lot out to the December next year. So I think we need to price some of that out. So, you know, I think there will be some movement, probably in the dollar. I wouldn't be surprised if the dollar peaked near term on the meeting, or on the press conference or announcement.
That is the exact call I heard from HSBC this morning, that the Fed dot plot is still too high. It needs to be much shallower.
But this is I'm glad you bring this up. Steve Major over at HSBC with the headline making, global headline call of a 1.5% 10-year yield. That is very different than the optimism I hear from your Tom Porcelli.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would like to point out, you just mentioned the dot plots. When you look at what the market price is already substantially below where the dot plots are. So even if the dot plots come down, clearly the market's not going to go, let's disregard the Fed. I mean, I'm not saying that. But, you know, we've already have incorporated a potential
I don't think the market believes the dot plots anyway.
No,
do they?
exactly.
I mean, I'm not even sure the Fed governors believe them, really, do they?